You may have noticed how easily the mind becomes disturbed when others behave in ways you don't like. A word, a gesture, a tone of voice, and suddenly a wave rises: anger, irritation, resentment. Anger, when it arises, often feels as though it has been triggered by something or someone outside of us. A rude comment, a dismissive gesture, a betrayal. The mind immediately points outward, blaming the external world for the disturbance it feels. Yet if we bring deep awareness to the moment anger begins to take shape, we notice something subtle but powerful. Anger does not originate in the other person. It originates in our resistance to what is. The outside world simply acts as a mirror, revealing to us the areas within where resistance lives. The true root of anger is not the event, but our internal refusal to allow the event to be as it is. This resistance is not conscious. It is built into the conditioned mind. The mind carries countless ideas of how things should be. It clings to images, expectations, and preferences, and when reality fails to conform to those mental images, it protests. That protest, the friction between reality and our mental story, is what gives rise to irritation, frustration, and eventually anger. So, in truth, the mind becomes angry not because it understands, but because it refuses to accept. For example, when someone interrupts us while speaking, the mind may interpret this as disrespect. A story forms: they don't value my voice. I always get overlooked. Or, this is just like last time. The event is no longer just an interruption. It becomes part of a narrative shaped by memory and ego. The anger that arises is not about the actual interruption, but about the story the mind attaches to it. The resistance to the moment fuels the emotional storm. If we could allow the interruption without mentally labeling it, without interpreting it through the lens of personal identity, there would be no anger. Only a moment of sound, a shift, perhaps a silence. The energy of the moment would move through us and dissolve. But the ego resists this. It thrives on separation, on being offended, on having an identity that needs defending. It says, I was wronged, and so it tightens. It arms itself. This contraction of energy is what we call anger. And yet, the moment we see this clearly, a space opens. We begin to recognize that our suffering was never about the other person. It was about our inner conflict with the reality of the moment. Nothing outside us can make us angry unless it finds a matching frequency inside, a belief, a wound, an expectation that hasn't been brought into awareness. When we become aware of this, the pattern starts to dissolve. To live without anger is not to suppress emotions or pretend everything is fine. It is to live without mental resistance. It is to allow each moment to be what it is, without insisting that it should be different. This does not mean we lose discernment or become passive. It simply means that we do not argue with what already is. We respond, if needed, from clarity, not from a reactive mind. This is the quiet power of awareness. When we see that anger arises from within, we stop being victims of other people's behavior. We reclaim our energy. We remain still. And in that stillness, we find that no one truly has the power to disturb our peace, unless we unknowingly give them that power by resisting the moment. By gently observing this inner resistance, we can disidentify from it. We can remain as the spacious awareness behind the thought, behind the emotion. And in that awareness, anger loses its fuel. The external world no longer pulls us into conflict. Instead, it becomes an invitation to awaken. There is a moment just before anger arises when something in us tightens, a small contraction, an energetic shift. Often we overlook it. But it is in that subtle movement that the ego prepares to defend itself. It believes it has been attacked, disrespected, diminished in some way, and so it reacts. This reaction is what most people identify as themselves. I'm angry. I'm upset. But the truth is far more spacious. The anger is arising in you, but you are not the anger. You are the one who is aware of it. Most people live in complete identification with their thoughts and emotions. When anger comes, they don't say, "There is anger arising." They say, "I am angry." It becomes a self-definition. But when you observe closely, you begin to notice the anger is an object in your awareness. You can feel it. You can witness it. And if you can witness something, then it cannot be what you truly are. You are not the passing clouds of thought or emotion. You are the sky in which they appear and disappear. This realization begins to break the illusion of identity. For so long, the ego has taken everything personally. It believes it must react, defend, prove something. It thrives on conflict. It loves to be right, and it loves to feel wronged, too, because then it can strengthen its sense of separateness. But when you are present, truly present, there is no need to defend anything. There is a deep knowing that nothing real can be threatened, and nothing unreal needs protection. When someone says something offensive, notice what happens inside. A surge, perhaps. A thought, how dare they? A memory of being treated this way before. The story begins. And yet, behind it all, you are still here, silent, alert, untouched. That silence is your true nature. Not the voice that complains or judges, but the awareness that sees the voice arise. You begin to discover a profound space within you. In that space, emotions come and go, but they no longer define you. Reactions may still arise. They are conditioned, after all, but there is now a gap between the trigger and the response. In that gap is freedom. You can see the anger forming, and you can choose not to merge with it. You can allow it to pass like a wave without becoming the wave. This is not suppression. Suppression is resistance in disguise. Suppression says, "I shouldn't feel this." But presence says, "Here it is." You simply notice the emotion without feeding it, without resisting it, without clinging to it. You remain the observer, grounded in the now. And in this awareness, the false sense of me that always needs to be right or respected begins to dissolve. There is no longer a strong someone who needs to win the argument or prove their worth. There is only this moment exactly as it is, and a still presence that welcomes it. So when anger arises, the invitation is not to fight it or act on it, but to witness it, to stay rooted as the consciousness in which it appears. When you do this, you realize that anger is just another wave in the ocean of being. It does not define you. It is not who you are. You are the space in which all things arise, the calm beneath the storm. The more you rest in this awareness, the less power anger has over you. You no longer react out of habit. You respond from stillness, or you don't respond at all. Either way, you remain at peace, because peace is what you are, and nothing anyone says or does can disturb that unless you forget who you are. The present moment is never the problem. It simply is. What creates suffering is not what is happening now, but the mind's resistance to what is. The mind imagines that the moment should be different. It says, "This shouldn't be happening," or "This isn't fair." And that thought, that judgment, becomes the source of inner turmoil. Yet the moment itself is neutral, always fresh, always complete in itself. It is the interpretation that causes pain, not the experience. The mind lives in stories. It compares what is with what it thinks should be. It clings to ideals, memories, preferences, and projected outcomes. Then, when life fails to meet those internal conditions, it rebels. That rebellion is what we call frustration, anger, disappointment. It is not the moment that disturbs us. It is our refusal to accept the moment that causes disturbance. The moment does not argue with us, only the mind does. When someone cuts in line, for example, the moment itself is simple. A person moves ahead, but the mind resists. It says they are rude, or this is unjust, and suddenly emotion floods the body. Yet that emotion was not in the event, it was in the mental resistance to it. This is the subtle structure of suffering. Once seen clearly, it begins to lose its power. In truth, the present moment is never against us. It has no agenda, no intent to offend. It simply unfolds in accordance with life's intelligence. Even when things go wrong, the moment itself remains as it is, pure, untouched by judgment. The pain comes only when we impose a narrative upon it, and that narrative is always based in time, past regret, future fear. But the now is free of time. It simply is. The more deeply we enter the now, the more peace we feel. Because peace is not something added to the moment. It is what remains when the resistance fades. When we stop arguing with life, even internally, there is a quiet joy that arises uncaused, natural. This joy does not depend on conditions. It comes from alignment with the truth of what is. So if someone criticizes you, that is part of the moment. Their words are sounds, vibrations. The ego immediately resists. It wants to defend, to strike back, to protect its image. But if you remain present, if you don't immediately react, you will notice something extraordinary. The moment is still whole. The words have passed. The sky has not fallen, and you are still here untouched. This doesn't mean we tolerate abuse or become passive. Presence is not weakness, it is clarity. And from clarity, wise action can arise. But that action is no longer a reaction. It is not fueled by unconscious emotion. It comes from stillness, from a deep connection to what is. Living in alignment with the present moment means no longer needing life to meet your expectations in order to feel at peace. It means accepting each moment as it comes, not as a resignation, but as a profound trust in life's unfolding. From that acceptance comes power, the power to respond wisely, the power to let go, the power to remain undisturbed. This is the invitation of every moment to let go of the story and return to the stillness beneath it. In that stillness, there is no resistance and therefore no suffering. You discover that life is not something to fight, but something to allow. And in that allowing, anger has no place to land. When another person behaves harshly, speaks without kindness, or treats you unfairly, the immediate tendency is to personalize their behavior. The mind quickly says, "They are doing this to me," and a sense of hurt or anger begins to rise. But what if their actions have very little, if anything, to do with you at all? What if, instead of seeing their behavior as an attack, you saw it as a reflection of their own inner state, an expression of unconsciousness? Most human beings live in a kind of sleep. They are caught in deeply conditioned patterns of thought, emotional pain, and psychological wounds that often go unexamined. When someone lashes out, judges, or behaves aggressively, it is almost always because they are reacting from this unconscious conditioning. They are not seeing the present moment clearly. They are not seeing you clearly. They are trapped in their own narrative, often driven by fear, pain, or insecurity. When you recognize this, your perspective begins to shift. Instead of reacting with anger or defensiveness, there is space for understanding. You begin to see that their behavior is not personal, it is habitual, it is mechanical. A person who is hurting will often project that hurt onto others. This does not make their actions right, but it does make them understandable. And from understanding, compassion can arise naturally. To see someone through the eyes of presence is to look beyond their behavior and into the essence of who they are beneath it. Every person carries within them the same formless awareness, the same stillness that lives in you. But most have forgotten. They are identified with the voice in their head, the emotional history they carry, the roles they play in the world. They speak and act not from awareness but from ego, and the ego by nature is reactive, defensive, easily threatened. When you are rooted in presence, you no longer meet unconsciousness with more unconsciousness. You no longer add fuel to the fire. You are able to remain still, grounded, and open. This doesn't mean you approve of all behavior or become a doormat. It means you no longer lose yourself in the reaction. You maintain clarity, and in that clarity, you can choose how to respond, or whether a response is needed at all. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all, simply not participating in the drama, not getting pulled into someone else's storm. That non-reaction is not weakness, it is strength. It arises from knowing that your peace is not dependent on another person's behavior. You don't need to control them. You don't need them to be different. You are already whole. The more deeply you rest in this understanding, the less often you will be disturbed by others. You will begin to see their actions as symptoms of unconsciousness, not as deliberate attacks. Just as you wouldn't blame a person for sleepwalking, you stop blaming people for acting out of their pain. You may still set boundaries. You may still walk away, but you do so without hatred, without the heaviness of resentment. This shift is not something the mind can force. It happens through awareness, simply watching, observing the way the mind wants to react, and choosing instead to rest in the stillness beneath the thought. Over time, this stillness becomes your home, and from this home, you see clearly what others do is a reflection of their own inner weather. You are not responsible for their storm. You are the calm that remains untouched. The idea of freedom is often misunderstood. Many believe freedom is about doing whatever you want, or about changing external situations so they align with your preferences. But true freedom is something deeper. It is not about controlling people or circumstances. It is about being so deeply rooted in presence that nothing has the power to disturb your inner state. Freedom is non-reactivity. It is the capacity to remain still inside, even when the outer world becomes chaotic. When you are reactive, you are not free. You are a puppet pulled by the strings of others' behavior. One comment, one look, one gesture, and your mood changes. Your peace disappears. You feel angry, disrespected, misunderstood. The moment that happens, someone else is controlling your internal weather. But when you are fully present, you realize no one has that kind of power over you. They can act, speak, behave however they will, but your response is yours. It arises not from compulsion, but from clarity. The ego, however, always seeks to react. It feeds on conflict. It thrives on opposition. The ego wants to be offended because then it gets to be right or superior or a victim. But presence sees this game for what it is. It notices the impulse to argue, defend, or retaliate, and it doesn't follow it. It allows the energy to rise, to be felt, and then to pass. That allowance is power. It is not passive but deeply alive and alert. It is the choice not to be drawn into unconsciousness. To live in non-reactivity is not to become cold or indifferent. It is to become deeply aware. When you do not react, you are able to perceive more clearly. You can sense the pain in another person's voice, the fear behind their anger, the unconsciousness in their actions. And from that clarity, true response is possible. Sometimes the most loving thing to do is to walk away. Other times it's to speak firmly, but without hostility. The difference is that your response comes from presence, not from the wounded ego. This way of being is not something you force. It arises naturally as you become more conscious. When you stay connected to the present moment, the space between stimulus and response opens. In that space, you find freedom. You realize that you are not obligated to follow every emotional impulse. You are not a slave to your thoughts. You are the space in which those thoughts arise. That space is vast, silent, unshakable. And it is from that space that true peace flows. Most people believe peace comes when everything around them is calm. But the world is rarely calm for long. People will continue to say things you don't agree with. Situations will continue to unfold in unexpected ways. If your peace depends on these conditions, it will be fragile, always under threat. But when peace comes from within, when it is grounded in non-reactivity, then it cannot be taken. It remains even when the world does not. This inner stillness is not distant or detached. It is fully here, fully awake. And from that stillness, you begin to live differently. You no longer need to prove anything. You no longer need others to behave in a certain way to feel okay. You are already okay. And that okayness radiates. It calms others, even if they are not aware of it. It disrupts the chain of reactivity. It brings presence where there was once conflict. In this way, non-reactivity becomes your greatest strength. Not because you dominate others, but because you are no longer dominated by them. You move through life with a quiet confidence, a gentle firmness, a deep knowing. Nothing can disturb the essence of who you are, because you are no longer giving others the power to do so. When anger or any strong emotion arises, the habitual tendency is to act on it immediately or to suppress it and push it out of awareness. The mind often feels threatened by emotional intensity and tries to either control it or escape from it. But there is another way, one that neither indulges the emotion nor resists it. That way is simple presence. It is the act of observing the emotion without becoming it. The moment you notice anger rising, instead of immediately identifying with the feeling or acting on it, you can simply pause and observe, not with judgment, not with resistance, just awareness. You become like a still lake, reflecting the stormy sky above without reacting to it. You watch the thoughts as they come. You feel the energy of anger moving in the body, perhaps heat in the chest, tension in the jaw, a quickening of the breath. All of this is noticed, but none of it is judged. It is allowed to be there. And in that allowing, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The anger begins to lose its grip. Its intensity may remain for a time, but your identification with it weakens. You are no longer saying, "I am angry." You are simply aware that anger is present. This shift in language reflects a deeper shift in consciousness. You are no longer lost in the emotion. You are witnessing it. And the one who witnesses is not angry. The one who witnesses is still, spacious, untouched. This witnessing presence is not a distant observer. It is deeply intimate with what is arising, but it is not overwhelmed by it. It does not push the emotion away, nor does it cling to it. It simply remains open. The energy of anger, like all emotions, is temporary. It wants to move through you. It is like a wave in the ocean of awareness. If you do not resist it, it comes, it rises, and then it falls away. What remains is the ocean, the unchanging presence that you are. Each time you practice this kind of conscious observation, you strengthen your ability to remain rooted in presence. you begin to notice patterns. You begin to feel the difference between reacting unconsciously and responding from stillness. And gradually, emotional states lose their ability to dominate your experience. You find a greater freedom, not because the emotions disappear, but because they no longer control you. There is no need to analyze the emotion in the moment. No need to ask, "Why am I angry?" or to go into stories about the past. That inquiry can happen later when the emotion has passed and the mind is clear. In the moment of arising, what matters is simply to stay present, to feel, to allow, to observe, to rest as awareness itself. This presence is not something you create. It is already here. You do not need to achieve it, only to notice it. It is the silent field in which all experience arises. When you remember to rest in this space, even for a few seconds, a profound shift occurs. The emotion is still there, but it is now held within the vastness of consciousness. It no longer defines you. Over time, this approach becomes your natural response. You no longer fear difficult emotions. You meet them with openness, with kindness, with awareness. And in doing so, you dissolve the unconscious patterns that have kept you trapped in reactivity. Each moment becomes an invitation to wake up. Each emotion, even anger, becomes a doorway to presence. And so, rather than fighting your emotions or being swept away by them, you learn to be with them. You discover that within you, there is a space wide enough to hold it all, without resistance, without attachment. In that space, true freedom is found, not in avoiding emotion, but in no longer being owned by it.